ADL friends and guests, please welcome to the stage Board Chair of ADL New England Regional Board, Joe Berman.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Good Fight, ADL New England's Forum on Confronting Antisemitism. To the hundreds, approximately 300 people here in Boston in the room, and the approximately 200 of you who are watching online. So we have about 500 people total watching today, participating virtually or in person. Your presence sends a powerful message that New England is no place for hate and anti-Semitism. I'm Joe Berman, and I am proud and honored to serve as the chair of ADL New England's Regional Board. Here in the shadow of the Zakim Bridge, named after the late beloved ADL Regional Director Lenny Zakim of blessed memory, we have gathered to confront anti-Semitism, to create a safe and just world. We know that confronting anti-Semitism is critical to stopping hate and bigotry in all of its forms. Through our program today, we will discuss strategies and tools for interrupting anti-Semitism in public places, in schools, and on campus, and in our communities. We will learn the skills to have constructive conversations about Israel, and we will take strength from each other in knowing that anti-Semitism will best be confronted as a community that is committed to learning, advocacy, and participating in the good fight. We are grateful to our lead sponsors, the Herman Dana Trust, the Ruderman Family Foundation, the Abraham Shapiro Charity Trust Fund, and Combined Jewish Philanthropies. We are honored to welcome our state treasurer, Deb Goldberg, Cambridge City Councilor Paul Toner, and Somerville City Councilor Kristen Strezzo, all of whom are inaugural signers of our pledge to speak up against anti-Semitism. As you may know, the Good Fight was planned to commemorate the October 2018 Tree of Life tragedy in Pittsburgh through a commitment to community learning and action. It is now my honor to introduce to you Rabbi Marc Baker, CJP's president and CEO, who has just returned from Israel, as we reflect on the Tree of Life. CJP has been a partner in the fullest sense of the word in joining ADL in confronting anti-Semitism in New England. Marc.
Four years ago, everything changed. Everything changed for the Tree of Life Synagogue and the Pittsburgh Jewish community. Everything changed for the families who lost their loved ones and for the 11 precious souls who were brutally murdered. Everything changed for American Jews, and everything changed for me, a Jewish Bostonian witnessing anti-Semitism growing in my own backyard. Our Jewish tradition teaches us that one who takes even one life, it's as if he destroyed an entire world. Worlds were destroyed at the Tree of Life Synagogue 4 years ago. So today, even as we discuss and strategize about rising anti-Semitism in this country and this community, let's keep these 11 precious souls in our hearts. Joyce Feinberg, Richard Gottfried, Rose Mallinger, Jerry Rabinowitz, Cecil Rosenthal, David Rosenthal, Bernice Simon, Sylvan Simon, Daniel Stein, Melvin Wax, and Irving Younger. Let's take a moment of silence to remember them. My grandparents were physically threatened on the streets of Chelsea and East Boston for being Jews. My wife's grandfather was not permitted to deliver babies in local Boston hospitals because he was Jewish. Yet just 2 generations later, the Jews of America and here in Boston are thriving in one of the most tolerant and accepting societies we've ever known. I feel blessed to have grown up in what felt like a post-anti-Semitic America, where the horrors that Jews have experienced in so many places throughout our history seemingly could not happen here. We learned 4 years ago, and we have seen over and over again since then, that it can indeed happen here. Jew hate is alive and well in America and right here in Greater Boston, and we must face it. We see the horrific attacks in Pittsburgh and Poway, the white supremacist march in Charlottesville, Kanye West's vile and hateful social media rants. And by the way, let's make no mistake that this rhetoric does incite and lead to violence. We see the obsessive demonization of Israel, the only Jewish state, in politics, the media, schools, and universities, as we'll discuss today. Right here in Greater Boston, we see the stabbing of Rabbi Shlomo Niginsky. We see the Duxbury football team calling a play called Auschwitz, and we see the mapping project. We see on some of our most prestigious university campuses the trafficking of anti-Semitic tropes and the shaming and marginalizing of Jewish students. Anti-Semitism can happen here, and it is happening here. And despite that, I continue to feel at home as an American Jew and a Bostonian, and I continue to believe in the promise of this country. So together with all of you, I recommit myself today, along with our brothers and sisters in Pittsburgh, across the country, and around the Jewish world, to a process of healing and repair. Together, let's commit ourselves to facing the realities of Jew hate in this country through learning and action, because fighting back against the complex and multifaceted phenomena of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism will require vigorous, nuanced, and collective responses. Thank you to the ADL for convening us this morning and for the important work you do every day, much of which many of us don't even see. CJP is so proud of and grateful for our partnership with you. I also want to thank the many other organizations locally and nationally, many of which are represented here today, with whom we stand shoulder to shoulder in this important work. Through these partnerships, we respond and fight back when we need to, whether against swastikas in schools or against BDS in Cambridge. Together, we're also developing new strategies and approaches to education, activism, and building bridges with allies, communities, and leaders whom we need to stand with us, just as we will stand with them against every form of bigotry and hate. And this includes supporting, educating, and empowering our next generation, especially those on college campuses, giving you the tools to build joyous Jewish communities, to stand up against Jew hate and the vilification of Israel when they need to. By the way, it's inspiring to see so many of you here today. Thank you. We're also working with the administrators and educators to ensure that campuses are safe and welcoming environments where our children can learn and thrive as proud Jewish Americans. We're not going to see anti-Semitism eradicated in our lifetimes, but we cannot and we will not be passive as it morphs, grows, and threatens our lives, our future, and our home. And let me just add, because we're on the eve of elections, both in this country and in Israel, that especially at a time of such heightened toxicity and polarization and political violence, we cannot afford to blame only the anti-Semitism coming from the political side with which we disagree. We cannot let those who hate us turn us against one another. We need to work together to raise our voices and to act. The hatred and the violence can happen here. Whether it will is up to us. And now I'd like to call up Shira Ruderman of the Ruderman Family Foundation, a foundation that has done as much as anyone in the Jewish world to promote safe, secure, and vibrant Jewish life here in Boston and in Israel. Shira.
Good morning. I'm pleased to be speaking to you today as the Executive Director of the Ruderman Family Foundation, which works tirelessly to enhance the ties between American Jewry and the State of Israel. We at the Ruderman Foundation are proud partners of ADL in the fight against anti-Semitism and bigotry. In the past 2 decades, the Ruderman Family Foundation has been standing at the forefront of strengthening the relationship and ties between Israel and American Jewry, under the fundamental belief that these relations are imperative to Israel's national security and to ensure the prosperity and safety of Jews around the world. Friends, it is unfortunate to say what we all know, but today, in 2022, it is not safe or comfortable to be Jewish, and more so, to be a Zionist. A recent study our foundation conducted with the Berman Group shows that 60% of American Jews today know a family member or a friend who has experienced anti-Semitism in the past 5 years. I repeat, 60%. Unfortunately, recent developments, which we all have heard about, giving us a harsh reminder of the complicated reality Jewish people face today and of the danger of not speaking up. With this complex reality, fortunately, we also have witnessed a wave of support from individuals across society, from leaders, celebrities, and major organizations that are made it clear anti-Semitism is not acceptable. It's not an option. It is time for us all to put our differences aside and stand together, united against hate. It is danger to all of us. We are thankful for our partners and the Anti-Defamation League for leading the handover to fight this hateful phenomena, and we look forward to continuing working together. We all have a lot to do. I'm honored to introduce to you Congresswoman Katherine Clark, who has proudly served the 5th District of Massachusetts since 2013. In fall of 2020, she was elected by her colleagues to serve as Assistant Speaker of the 117th Congress, making her the second-ranking woman in the House of Representatives. Katherine's career in public service is driven by her commitment to helping children and families to succeed. She believes that Congress must work to end the glaring disconnect between needs of families at home and priorities in Washington. She is a tireless advocate for fair and just treatment for all, which, as we all know, is part of ADL's core mission. Katherine has been a steadfast ally in ADL's fight against anti-Semitism, beginning with her first involvement in politics as a member of the Melrose School Committee. She represents a diverse district comprised of 24 cities and towns that stretch from the coastal communities of Revere and Winthrop through the economic engine of Metro West. Please help me to welcome Congresswoman Katherine Clark to the stage.
Good morning. Thank you, Shira, for that introduction, and a special thanks to Joe Berman and Robert and everyone at ADL for inviting me to join you here today. I am so proud to be a small part of the work you're going to do today, the work that you have been doing, and this conversation about how we address and act on anti-Semitism and bigotry in all forms. And the work that you are doing is going to help us build a future for our children where everyone feels safe and accepted. And as I thought about coming here today, I went back to an event for me that was very formative when I was a fairly new member of Congress, and that was a trip to Israel in 2015. While I was there, I got to visit Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Remembrance Center, and I'm sure that many of you have been there, and I hope all of you get to go there. From the beginning of the visit there, the architecture of the building itself showed me how anti-Semitism takes root. For those of you who haven't been there, the displays are down below, but you can see up to the high windows and see people walking by, and the blue sky was so vivid behind them. But they can't see in, or you don't see them looking in, even though we're right there. And you would have to get down and look at street level to see what was truly going on. And that is the moment we find ourselves in. Are we going to look? Are we going to see what is happening here? And the display that really moved me in that museum was a letter from Senator Taft. In that letter, he went on an explanation of why he was not going to support having 20,000 Jewish children come to the United States. Jewish children who were fleeing persecution of the Nazis. And it sounded familiar themes. The focus had to be on Americans and American jobs here. What would happen when these children grew up? Our economy cannot take in this many refugees. We have to be protective. This letter was written in 1939, and we also know that in this country in 1939, we were also in a time of high anti-Semitism. Standing there, knowing that this was how Senator Taft chose to use his power, knowing that only a small percentage of those children survived the Holocaust, I started to weep. And I vowed at that time that if there was a similar situation, I would be like Edith Norse Rogers, very proud to have her be a Congresswoman from Massachusetts. We've only had 7. And Edith broke from her Republican Party to sponsor and vote for this very thing, raising the quota for Jewish immigrants in order to rescue these children. What I didn't foresee in 2015 was how quickly that vow to be someone who stands up and acts would be tested. The ADL has titled this forum The Good Fight, and we are certainly in it. As Rabbi Baker memorialized, our thoughts are with all of those 11 souls and their families, their corresponding worlds, as you said, that were devastated at the Tree of Life synagogue murders. But it is beyond even one horrible incident. The Boston Globe reported yesterday that 1/3 of adults believe in a version of replacement theory, that 1 in 4 Jewish Americans said they have experienced anti-Semitism. We see the MAGA extremists routinely using anti-Semitic tropes and stereotypes, accusations of dual loyalty, and threats against Jewish people. Tucker Carlson, Kanye West, Marjorie Taylor Greene all promote anti-Semitism, and it is picked up by white supremacist groups around this country. Just in September, I was in Michigan for our Parents' Weekend in Ann Arbor, sort of a bastion of liberalism right in the middle of Michigan. But I saw white supremacists protesting a synagogue, and their signs were vile and shocking in their anti-Semitism. And these were not signs that were hand-painted. These were permanent signs because they are there every single week in front of this synagogue. But it is not just the extreme right. And I think that is what was so shocking and horrifying of sort of the litany of issues that we have seen and faced, but is the mapping project that really stood out for me in June. The mapping project named and gave addresses of 500 groups, organizations, schools, government officials, and private citizens, some of whom are in this room today. It made a chilling call to dismantle and disrupt Boston's Jewish community. And when we talk about college campuses, and what we're seeing in the discussion we're going to have today. The mapping project came out in June, and in September, in my new district, the Wellesley College paper endorsed the mapping project, citing their belief that the only way to stop injustices happening in occupied territories is by boycotting anything and everything relating to Israel. We want robust debate. We want to be challenged on policies. We want to be challenged on policies here and in Israel. But there is a line. There is a line where that debate, that political passion, turns to our Jewish students, shaming, ostracizing, and blaming. And I applaud Paula Johnson, who is here today, for standing up and knowing that there is a difference between free speech and debate that we foster in our academic colleges and the mapping project. Because we know the mapping project is an echo of other times when stereotyping and isolation of the Jewish people led to their dehumanization and then led to their destruction. And the rise of anti-Semitism is a blaring red warning light for all of us. As historian Deborah Lipstadt said, anti-Semitism begins with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. Attorney General Garland, Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas testified before Congress recently that the greatest domestic threat facing the United States comes from ethnically and racially motivated violent extremists. Anti-Semitic, racist, and misogynist forces are attempting today to threaten, intimidate, and divide us. And there is one path forward, and it is laid out in ADL's mission: to stop the defamation of Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. We must stand together to stop anti-Semitism because it is the only path forward for justice for all of us. Jewish leaders have always been on the front lines of civil rights, whether for the right to vote, ending discrimination and housing and employment, LGBTQ rights. And we must stand with you at this critical crossroad. as we look to the upcoming elections on November 8th, it is not a question of party. It is a question of who will act, who will cry out against anti-Semitism, who will be our partner in this work. You have demonstrated this by inviting Liz Cheney to your ADL conference in New York. I do not agree with Liz Cheney on just about everything, but she stands for justice, and she knows what it means to stand when it is hard and when it calls for personal sacrifice. So it's easy to get discouraged. Even from the time I knew I was coming to speak with all of you, things have even slid. And I am worried about where we're going as a country. But when I get worried, I think about Selma and the great privilege I had to serve with John Lewis and to get to go to that bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, with him, and hear about Bloody Sunday from John and being that voice for all of us in the work that you're doing here today. But for those of you who haven't been to that bridge, the bridge has a very steep rise, and then it flattens out in the middle and then has a steep descent. So you are committed to going over that bridge before you can really see what lies ahead. And what for those marchers lay ahead was violence, it was hatred, it was all of that opposition to what they were trying to do right there. But they knew their mission and they were already committed. We know they were turned back and they regrouped and brought more marchers with them. And they marched together in bigger numbers. And it was an ugly, violent, and sometimes deadly process. But ultimately, they were victorious in moving us forward. We are in the middle of that bridge, all of us together. And we know the hate and bigotry that are right in front of us. But with the leadership of ADL, and each and every one of you in your own personal sphere, we will march together. We will not be defeated. We will march together against anti-Semitism and for justice for all, and we will be successful. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Congresswoman Clark, for your support and your inspiring words. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Good Fight. My name is Geraldine Acuna Sunshine, and I'm a proud member of the ADL National Board of Directors. This month, ADL released an alarming report detailing the rise of anti-Israel and anti-Zionist activities on college campuses. About 359 incidents across the United States during the 21 to 22 academic year. Many of these incidents occurred at some of our most revered and beloved campuses right here in New England, reflecting a climate that has felt increasingly isolating for our Jewish students. More specifically, the report points to disturbing trends, which include expelling or excluding students from campus groups for expressing any affinity with Israel, voicing support for anti-Israel terror and violence, and invoking classic anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracies in lectures and social media posts. On an individual level, our students are reporting that they hide their Judaism or support of Israel from their peers because they do not feel safe sharing that support. Those who decide to share face retribution, are ostracized, or experience public shaming. As parents, alums, and community leaders, it is our greatest desire that our campuses allow for the full expression of Jewish life by all. Learning how we can help make that happen is why many of us are here today. As we introduce our speakers today, I am so sorry to share with you that in the past hour, Harvard President Dr. Lawrence Bacow has let us know that he is unable to be here today due to illness. We are, of course, disappointed, but wish him a swift recovery. As many of you know, President Bacow is one of the most widely experienced leaders in American higher education, known for his commitment to expanding student opportunity, catalyzing academic innovation, and encouraging university civic engagement and service to society. This morning, I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Paula Johnson, who has been the president of Wellesley College since 2016. As a cardiologist and the founder of the Connor Center for Women's Health and Gender Biology at Brigham and Women's Hospital, she shifted paradigms by recognizing that disease presentation is often influenced by biological factors intersecting with the social determinants of health, including race. Throughout a groundbreaking career in academic medicine, public health, and higher education, President Johnson has focused on creating the conditions that allow women to thrive. Having this important conversation with President Johnson this morning is Robert Trestan, the Regional Director of ADL New England and Vice President of ADL's West Division. Robert is responsible for overseeing ADL's program delivery, community relations, and advocacy initiatives across the region. As a civil rights leader and attorney for more than 25 years, he has prioritized developing community partnerships and initiatives that advocate for justice, equity, and fair treatment for all. Please welcome President Johnson and Robert Trestan to the stage.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
So let me just say, one of the things that I think in like a not post-COVID, but in a COVID era, we all get the instruction not to go to school, not to go out when you're ill. So President Bacow's following that advice. I spoke to him and his wife about an hour and a half ago, so he sends his deep regrets, and we hope to be able to engage in a conversation with him at a later time. But I can tell you, just hearing from his voice, he should be home taking care of himself, which I think is the advice that we all need to be always giving ourselves and people in our families and those in our circles. So he does send his deep regrets. But I'm really honored to have Dr. Paula Johnson, President Johnson of Wellesley College, to be engaged in this conversation with us today. Just by way of, if you want to ask a question, I hope you downloaded the app. We have staff who are monitoring the app, and you can type your question into the app, and then one of my colleagues will bring up some of the questions when we get a little farther into the program. But I want to start, President Johnson. Many of us read articles and are engaged in discussions about Jewish life on campus, particularly for people within the Jewish community who, in one way or another, are connected to the Jewish community, and our students are on campus. Can you give us a little bit of a sense from your perch? What is your assessment of Jewish life on campus, just to sort of set the stage for getting into some of the deeper discussion?
Well, Robert, first I want to say thank you to you, and thank you to the ADL for addressing this critically important topic. And just to say my thoughts are with Larry for a quick recovery. When I talked to him this morning, I said it was doctor's orders to remain home. But just know I'm going to try my best to. He and I have had many discussions on this topic, so I will try my best, although I know not good enough, to channel some of his thoughts and experience. And before I start, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you because, there are times that there are things that happen on our campuses and that we do need a reasonable, informed voice to talk with. And I have your cell phone, and whenever I call, you're there. So I just want to say thank you.
Of course. Well, that's what we're here for.
Yeah. So back to Jewish life. First of all, I want to give a shout out. Our rabbi, Rabbi Dina Bodian, is here with Wellesley students. And we had a call with about 130 Jewish Wellesley alumni just this past week, and Rabbi Bodian was on the call, and I think we would both describe Jewish life on campus as active, inclusive, thriving, with a diverse group of Jewish students. Jewish students who are coming from all over the world with different perspectives. And many of whom for the first time, just like any other identity group, are for the first time coming to college and may have lived a life where they did not identify or didn't grow up in a home identifying as Jewish and are finding that identity on campus. But with that being said, our students took part in the Hillel ADL survey, and I would say that they are experiencing some of what was reported in the survey. So this sense from many of their peers that Jewish students are a monolith, that they all are from the same opinion, which in and of itself we all know is a form of discrimination. There are students on campus who also feel that they cannot freely express their Jewish identity. And I know we'll talk more about that and the reasons why, but I think these are the issues that are worrisome and the issues and the experiences that we really have to counter.
So we know that things are going to happen on campus because in many ways they're sort of mini cities, whether it's a college or a large university, and whether it's a speaker or something that may actually happen in a classroom, programs, there's often an immediate demand for whether it's the president or a dean to speak out, to do something. And I know from the perspective of ADL, we get those calls, and they are often calling us and asking us to get an administration to take some action. So I wanted to sort of get a little bit into like the decision making. Like, how do you make some of those decisions about when do you speak out, when do you not speak out? And a little bit of maybe the president's perspective is a way to kind of describe it. Congresswoman Clark made reference to your speaking out when the Wellesley News, for those who don't know, the Wellesley News took a position endorsing the boycott divestment movement, and they really followed suit from what the Harvard Crimson had. The Harvard Crimson editorial board took the same position last spring. The Wellesley News followed suit, I don't know, a few weeks ago in the last month, and they also endorsed the mapping project. Could you give us a little bit of insight, like what goes on behind the scenes, in a president's office and the administration when you're trying to make these decisions and are sort of bombarded with different stakeholders?
Robert, so that was a lot that we would need to unpack. And I'm going to answer the last part of the question first, but know that there are a number of issues that you brought up that are important. For example, what's happening in our classrooms? And are we fostering an environment in our classrooms where there is active civil discourse on difficult topics? So maybe we can park that one to the side for a few minutes, but let me just talk now about the Wellesley News and some of the thinking that goes into it. I do want to just acknowledge that they have walked back from that position, very fortunately, around the mapping project. But as that editorial came out, it was very clear to me, and I'll talk a little bit about the process, that there was a line that had been crossed with regard to an organization that all of you know really promotes a certain type of targeting and promotes a type of violence that does cross a very significant line. Many of our alumni, as many of you in this room, as you heard Representative Clark say, are on those lists, and quite frankly, Wellesley College and a number of other colleges and universities are on that list, and that's something I'm really going to want to talk about as well. So for me, there was really a moral imperative to address the mapping project, to make sure that it was very clear that the newspaper's opinion, and they have a right to speak, but that the opinion was not that of the college. And as I was writing the response, we began to get calls from media outlets asking that question, which led me to then get it out even faster. But I think that there was a big question as to whether or not this was the college's view, and to make it clear that it wasn't. Now, there are a lot of other ways that we are approached about making comments, and what is it that we usually think about? We usually have to think about, one, what is the impact on our campus, on our student body? Is it mission central? Do we have to think about how does it relate to the mission of higher education, to the mission of the college? And at Wellesley, I think about that not only from a higher ed perspective, but also as being a leading women's college perspective. Every time we are asked to speak, we have to think about who are we leaving out? Who might we be silencing as an unintended consequence? And what precedent we are really setting. So those are some of the things that we think about. And believe me, we get, and I'll speak as I know I can speak for my colleagues here, we get requests probably every other week to speak out on something. And that can be anything from natural disasters that impact people and their families, all the way to what we are talking about today. So I'm putting that into context to say the mapping project did cross a line for me. What I didn't do was speak out against BDS. And, my personal opinion is that I do not agree with the movement. I oppose the movement. I think that the spreading of the movement has actually increased anti-Semitic acts on our campuses. And I also think that newspapers, student newspapers, have the right to name, to really criticize whomever they would like to criticize. So I left that piece alone, whether it's Israel, whether it's the United States, et cetera. Now, I got a lot of response about not going far enough, but that was my thinking there. So, this has caused a tremendous controversy on campus, as you can imagine. The fact that I did say something and has led to calls by the newspaper for an apology from me because of the social media. We live in this world of social media that has occurred. I think what I've tried to do is use this as a teaching moment, that words really do have impact, that they have power, and that they have consequences. So that's where we are today. And we'll talk, obviously, about the work we need to do on our campus, but on campuses more broadly.
I just want to ask a related question about incidents. So I know that there have been times when we've spoken on the phone when something's happened on the Wellesley campus. Is that different than how does that factor in? Because I know that incidents, at least for us, were a bit of a repository of anti-Semitic incidents, all over the country. How do you make those decisions?
So, I think that when I know about them, so that's another issue that we have to discuss, which is that there are, and I think this was clearly stated in the survey, in the Hillel ADL survey, we have got to do a better job of providing the easy avenues in which there is not retribution for members of our communities to report anti-Semitic acts. And I think this is a box here where we know that they're happening, but the reporting is really minimal. And that's part of the education we have to do, and a lot of work has to happen there. But when we do know about them, and I'm just going to share one that I know I called you about, which was that there was a piece of public art that on the Wellesley campus in the woods, and students were walking by it and saw that it had been vandalized, and on it was a symbol that looked like a swastika. And as you can imagine, this then spread quickly throughout the campus, and as you would imagine, the terror that leads to in our Jewish community and in others. So I called you, we had pictures of it, and I asked you to please look at it, and you sent it to the
analyst.
The analyst, which was very, very helpful. And it did turn out that symbol was a Hindu symbol that is very similar looking to a swastika, but was not. In that situation, I did speak out because I knew that I knew what kind of terror that experience had on the community. And to let them know that, one, what it was not, but two, to validate their feelings of fear and to also make clear what it is we as a college stand for. So that's just one example.
One of the things that you mentioned a moment ago when you were talking about the decision-making around the mapping project was the almost public perception of like this is the college newspaper editorial's view versus Wellesley College. And one of the things that we get a lot of calls when controversial speakers come onto campus. And most of the time it's a student group, which, in my view, that's almost like, okay, it's students, just like a student-run newspaper, and they're going to invite, they may invite a controversial speaker. Sometimes it does cross the line. But what happens when it's an academic department that ends up being a co-sponsor? And I know that for many people in the community, that is, it ends up being a bit of a blurred line. Academic department hosting, whether it's someone who could be, a record of anti-Semitism or racism. How does that figure into the decision making? I know that this, for those who don't know, there was a controversial speaker that recently spoke at MIT in the last 2 weeks, and there were 4 academic departments that were a co-sponsor, and that was sort of that was the area that we got a lot of calls about.
Yeah. So, Robert, this is the question of academic freedom, which is, I know what you're getting at here, is an area that we need to discuss further and enforce the importance of academic freedom. It is the foundation of higher education in the United States. It is what makes higher education in the United States as extraordinary as it is. And with that, we also have to be able to discuss controversial issues, have controversial speakers of all types. And as you can imagine, if and when you shut down a speaker of one type, what is it that you are then compelled to shut down of another type? I'm not saying that it's what we want to hear, but hearing it and being able to understand that we have a responsibility to foster that freedom and to protect that freedom is critical. Now, with that being said, we need to do a far better job of discussing all points of view on any particular issue. And I would venture to say that on the Israeli-Palestinian issues, we have not done a great job. And we have not fostered the kind of civil discourse. We have not done the kind of teaching around the history of the conflict, the history of Israel. We have really left a gap to be filled in. And so there is work for us to do on our campuses, because a lot of what is happening is based on either misinformation or an uninformed point of view. The point here isn't to change minds and hearts. The point is to educate, and that's what we are. We're educational institutions. So I think this is the work ahead, and it's true for any particular issue, but I think this one in particular is extraordinarily difficult, and the silence around the civil discourse, as I've said on my own campus, is deafening. So let me just share with you, when we talk about academic freedom, what has happened on our campus, and I think it's been an infringement on academic freedom. So the mapping project identified a particular course that is taught at Wellesley in Peace and Justice Studies that really looks at the more nuanced and balanced discussion and view and education around the Israeli-Palestinian history and conflict. It is in fact taught by a Palestinian professor, Associate Professor of Peace and Justice Studies, Nadia Haj, who is a political scientist. By naming this one course, which by the way is the course at Wellesley that teaches about this conflict, it is meant to silence. It is meant to silence a balanced view of this issue. So what has happened because of that, and because of the focus, there's fear. We've had to change her classroom. We've had to take a number of other precautions with the police, FBI, et cetera, which is what we've had to do on a number of these issues. And she will not be teaching the course next year.
Wow.
But I think this is the silencing, right? This is the infringement on academic freedom, and imagine what that does now for our students. So I don't have an answer for you, but know that we have to commit to a new path.
Yeah, and I think it's when you say, we've sort of failed to really do a good job, I don't think it's just higher education. I think, the high schools have failed in that respect too, and probably many of the students are not prepared, whether it's for civic discourse or, this particular topic by the time they get to campus, and that kind of feeds into this. So I think it's an important reminder that all of us need to be thinking about it, not just, it's too late when you get to, when we get to college. One of the other trends that I think is a little bit related to this is around student clubs, and there are a couple examples in the last year or so where some student groups have been having these their own kind of rules, different, almost like a litmus test. So we saw some activity at Tufts University last year with Students for Justice in Palestine basically putting out a call for people to say that they will not engage with groups that have anything to do with Zionism or pro-Israel in any way. And then most recently at the Berkeley School of Law in California, where 8 student groups basically, they amended their bylaws to say that we will not have any speakers who, adhere to or agree with Zionism in any way. And ironically, Dean Erwin Chemerinsky, who's the dean of the law school, that would mean that he wouldn't be able to even speak to the women of law at Berkeley. And he's one of the foremost, for those of you who don't know, one of the foremost constitutional law experts in the country. But How does a university administration deal with a situation like that? I mean, that seems to, I have a sense that it's on a pathway to litigation, because there are certainly lawyers in the United States who are ready to take this on. But when a student group does that, is that crossing a line, or is that still part of the learning environment on a campus?
Yeah. So this is another complex question, right? With many levels. So let me just say, of course it crosses a line. You know, that does cross a line. But let's think about this at the various levels that you said, how does an administration think about it? So at Wellesley, for example, we have an honor code. Those of you who are alumni in the audience know that you live by the honor code. And you would think under the honor code are all these things about non-discrimination, et cetera, because that's a life of honor. Well, you know, in today's world, with rampant social media and with our campuses reflecting what is happening in our country, which is more and more polarization, that isn't enough. So many of us have codes of conduct. And in those, we are about to implement ours, but many of those codes of conduct have clauses in there, pieces around non-discrimination, et cetera. So that's kind of the code of conduct. Then there are the rules around campus organizations that are sanctioned by the campus. And those have rules against discrimination. Part of the problem is that, so just take individual instances of discrimination. Many of those are done anonymously. Many of those are instances that we can't track and or sometimes not reported, and that's getting to the reporting piece. So codes of conduct are important and rules are important. And when issues are brought to the administration, we can address them. But that just isn't good enough, because that's just a rule-based working at issues around the edges. And we haven't really addressed is the fundamental problem of why is this happening? And that is the fundamental problem. And if we don't begin, I think, on our campuses, and we've taken this up, which is how do you, on any number of issues, one, educate? We've already talked about this particular issue. But this idea of learning from each other, civil discourse, where does that get taught? How do we bring students in? I'll tell you, we are thinking about a process that has already been implemented even in the residence halls, where students can't be diverted into their identity groups, where they have to be together. How do you talk across difference? It's actually being taught. How do you negotiate conflict? It's actually being taught. We've been working on inclusive classrooms. How do we model discussing difficult issues in classrooms when more and more students are reacting against hearing difficult topics and approaching those difficult issues? And sometimes it is being called out as being racist or against a particular group, when in fact the classroom is in fact the place where we have to have that discussion. So the rules-based piece, I think, is, of course, we have to have the rules, we have to have the policies, but if we don't get to the underlying reason that this is happening, we're not going to address the problem. And let me say one last thing on this, because as we're talking about these issues, we are talking about the fringe. We're talking about the extremes, the polarization of our country, which is seen as the polarization on our campuses. There is a very large, and I personally believe the majority of our students who are in the middle. And I call them the silenced or silent majority. Those are the students who we need to get to. We need to let them have their voice. We need to make sure that they are learning, because they can be a tremendous force for good. And we spend so much time on the edge that we actually don't get to what I believe is the majority.
First of all, I think the models that you're describing like that's great. And hopefully there are, campuses around the country that are looking to you for leadership, because the classroom is a place where we want people to, when they leave campus, to really be, we want them to be civic citizens where they can engage in a dialogue that is less conflict driven. But I want to, in sort of the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, DEI has been almost a household word. I think both in the private sector, the public sector, and on campuses. And ADL is doing a lot of work in the DEI space on the corporate side. One of the things that we often see is that anti-Semitism is actually not part of a DEI program. And I know that this is important on the Wellesley campus. And often in the aftermath of incidents, we're often in a discussion about how do we increase awareness and learning amongst campus professionals, deans, and academics about anti-Semitism. So tell us a little bit about how that fits in, how is anti-Semitism part of the DEI program and the DEI work at Wellesley, and how does that fit in on a college campus?
Yeah. It's a really important point, and I'd point, and everyone in this audience has probably seen the set of recommendations from a large coalition of a group of colleges and universities, along with Hillel, and I may be missing another organization, excuse me, but a number of recommendations that can be implemented to combat anti-Semitism on campuses. And being more inclusive in terms of including anti-Semitism in other DEI work is one of them. We have not been that good on that. We have not routinely included it, and that will now change. In partnership, we have a commission on equity, race, and ethnicity, and along with the head of that particular, the faculty lead in that group, in partnership with some of the other administrative leadership who's focused on DEI initiatives, and that includes our faculty as well as our staff, that we are going to begin a working group to, in conjunction with that group, to really begin to integrate anti-Semitism into that work. Now, why is this important? It's important because anti-Semitism and combating anti-Semitism is not just the work of the Jewish community. And we've been getting a lot of focus, and Rabbi Bodian is here, really looking to the rabbi as having the answers. And that's not really the way we should be operating. It is really an institutional issue that we have to better integrate and educate, quite frankly, our leaders at the college about, because many people are uneducated about this topic. And that's going to be a large part of this. And then really working, as we bring students in, as we onboard students in the fall, we talk about a number of DEI issues. This needs to be one. Anti-Semitism needs to be one. So it needs to be really focused on as part and parcel of the DEI work. Different groups have different issues and come from different perspectives. But at the end of the day, our goal is to make the campus one in which the entire community, but of course our students, feel a sense of belonging and have the ability to flourish no matter what their backgrounds.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that that's a priority. I want to ask one other question, and then we'll get to some questions that the audience has. Thank you, Peggy. My wife and I are actually parents of a freshman and a junior, so we're first-year empty nesters. So I want to ask a bit of a parent question, because I know there's a lot of parents in the room and that are watching online. And something happens on a campus, anti-Semitic incident, or it could be any kind of incident. From the parent perspective, you're like, okay, what's going on? But what's your best advice to parents? I'm sure that your office and team gets a lot of calls. We get them. But what's your advice to parents when when anti-Semitism pops up on a campus?
Yeah. And I'm going to say that I'm a parent. My husband's actually in the audience, and we're the parents of a college graduate, and another and our younger child is in a special school. So we think about this and what is the safety. And there are a few things I would say around anti-Semitism specifically, but whenever there's a major issue, parents want to know that the administration, that the president and others are taking it seriously, that we recognize it as a problem, that we name it as a problem or as an issue, and that we have a way of addressing it. So I think that's what parents are looking for. Number two, they're looking for an assurance that we are going to do everything in our power to keep the campus community safe. And that is, we haven't talked more about protests, but disruptions, violence, what does that look like? What are the precautions that we take? Parents want to know that when they send their students to our campuses, that we are doing everything in our effort to keep them safe. And then third, and I think more specifically around the anti-Semitism, the issue of anti-Semitism, is to assure families that we do invest in and believe in a strong and thriving Jewish life on campus. And we know that that is critically important, just like it's important for other identity groups. That is very important to have that community. I'm not saying it's enough, but it's important to have that community, to have that kind of bonding, to bolster each other, to create resilience. And so I think as we think about parents, those are kind of the areas that I tend to reassure parents with.
That's good advice. All right, I'm going to go through a couple of these questions in the remaining time we have. So, is there a special role for a consortium of college professors to speak out collectively on this issue? And they're citing the example of Father Hesburgh of Notre Dame, something that Father Hesburgh did during the Vietnam War.
Yeah, so it's a really important point, and I do think that, well, first of all, let me just say Brandeis is, and I've talked to Ron Leibowitz about this, Brandeis is going to announce soon the launching of a very large initiative that will bring high-level college administrators, including presidents, together to address these issues, and also K through 12. So I think that is work that around how we organize and share and think together and really move this issue forward will be happening, I think, on a more routine basis. What about our faculty? Yes, there is a real need. And remember, our faculty in many ways are being threatened as well. And their academic freedom is being threatened. When there are professional organizations that have taken a stand in favor of BDS, that leaves professionals who are reliant on these organizations for all types of contacts and advancement. It's silencing again. So there is a role, and that role has to be carried out sensitively as we think about the current climate.
Well, there's actually a very relevant follow-up question, which I'm guessing was not intended, but it's about Professor Hodges' class being canceled, and there was sort of a audible voice, I think, collectively in the room when you shared that information. But the question is, like, how do colleges address the need for students to learn a balanced perspective when about the Jewish people, about the Holocaust, about this sort of big topic? Is the cancellation, is that a victory for the extremists?
Yeah. It is a victory for the extremists. And we didn't cancel it. I think, as you can imagine, the fear that she has experienced through this process. And so it absolutely is a victory for them. It did exactly what they intended to do. So this is, in fact, the danger. How do we move forward? I think that we are going to have to think strategically about where these issues fit in our curriculum, who can teach them, and if we don't have faculty who can, where can we get them? And where can we bring to campus, again, a civil, balanced conversations that are rooted in history, that are rooted in fact. And this is the work ahead of us.
All right, this will be the last question. When does anti-Semitism have to stand up against, when does the administration actually stand up against misinformation, anti-Semitism speech versus allowing free speech? I mean, this seems to be one of the biggest challenges, of a campus president.
Yeah, well, it is, and I think it gets back to some of the issues that I talked about earlier in terms of speaking out on every piece of misinformation or affront, because if you do that, then the need to speak out on everything, and whether people agree or not, that is the position that we are in. So I think that when there are things that really do cross the line, as we've talked about, there's an absolute need. When there, and I know Larry would have said this, President Baca would have said this, when Hillel on the campus of Harvard was vandalized, he spoke out. I think there are clear episodes in the lives on our campus when it is important for us to have our voices heard. It can't be for every piece of speech, because that then does infringe on freedom of speech, and it does then have unintended consequences of potentially silencing a whole number of other types of views. So I think we have to be careful, but know and have a good sense of where the line is, and have a lot of discussion about it. There is not one statement, I think, that any of us make that we don't think deeply about, and that we don't discuss and really get as many views as possible.
You have a hard job.
But it's a wonderful job, right? This is the challenge of the future and the hope for the future. And if we don't embrace this, then what hope is there, right?
Well, I just want to thank you, but I thank you for being here today and being engaged in the conversation. But I actually really appreciate the work that you're doing every single day, because it does sound like a hard job with probably a dozen challenges every day. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert.
We really appreciate you being with us today. So
thank you.